Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today. Leya Van Doren is a creativity coach, podcast host, seeker, and collector of stories and seashells. She hosts creativity workshops to help creatives nurture their inner artist, break free of their creative blocks, and be in community and connection. Hi, Leya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick things off with you telling us your story. Like, how did you get to doing this work that you're doing today?
Yeah, such a good question because I love to hear people's journeys and stories myself. And I feel like, there's so many twists and turns, but then when you kind of land and you're able to look back at everything, in your life thus far, you kind of see how all the dots connect. And so for me, trying to make, in the very condensed version, I grew up in a very creative, artistic household. My parents are both musicians. Growing up, my mom had a piano and voice studio that operated out of our home. My dad was a music director at a regional theater outside of New York City. So growing up, I was surrounded by musical theater, by the arts, by music, and creativity in the arts were just so part of me and my family's culture and at all of those things. And I felt a deep calling to theater. Theater was like my one true love. I grew up performing on stage since the age of 3 with my dad, who was the music director at this theater. And that was like my education. I was also homeschooled from up until 6th grade. So really the like foundation of my experience was in the arts, and was obsessed with musical theater. Like it was all I thought about. All I wanted to do was be on Broadway. And, that was just like my soul calling. And so I went to college to pursue musical theater. I studied musical theater, and the big dream was to graduate from college and move to New York City and start auditioning. So I went to college to pursue musical theater, and I loved it. I spent like 4 years on campus from 8 a.m. in ballet class all the way till 10 p.m. at night in rehearsals, and was just really thriving because I love theater and I love studying and I love school and I loved being in that community of artists. It was everything. And so then I graduated college, and my plan was to move to New York City, start auditioning, all of that. And I ended up getting an apprenticeship at this theater out in Connecticut. And I thought it was like a 9-month or maybe a year-long apprenticeship, and it was close to the city. I went to school in California. And so I took it as an opportunity to like really get my feet in the door and start meet people, networking, because that's my ultimate goal was to be an actress and to, move to New York and start auditioning and all these things. So I moved to this theater in Connecticut, and this apprenticeship was in the business office. So it wasn't even necessarily a creative job, and I had no experience whatsoever in business, but, it was a theater. I was able to, be around creative people. And it was really my first taste of like the real adult world 9-to-5 job. And it was really hard. After graduation, I went through this period, and I think it's after, experiencing this and then, helping clients through this as well, this like period post grad is really difficult because you're making this transition into your adult life and you're not really sure, what steps to take. And I think in school, they really teach you to, do this, and this, and then you'll get this grade. And, it's all kind of laid out for you. But I was really realizing that, I was on my own. I no longer had mentors in the form of teachers. I no longer had my community of artists around me. I really felt like I was just on my own in this world, and started to really doubt myself as a creative. And if I could really make this a possible career for myself, and really questioning what I wanted out of my life and what I wanted my life to look like. And like I mentioned, I had spent my entire life being really creative, really artistic, really didn't know anything else but that. But I think being stuck in this like 9-to-5 routine and being surrounded by people who were doing creative things, but I wasn't doing that myself. That wasn't my job or my role. And really like felt very stuck and lost and blocked, like honestly didn't know or understand my own creative voice, because I had been in school or, with family, that people were always telling me, what to follow, or, if you want to get into this role, you have to sing this type of song, like all of these different types of messages that I actually didn't really know what Leya, loved to do. Like I didn't know my creative soul. And so I went on this like journey where I was really lost and feeling confused, and went on this journey to reconnect back with my creative soul. And so I started to kind of just follow things that I love to do, and really getting to know myself as an artist in a different way. And so I did the artist way, which was a huge catalyst in my journey. I did the artist way, started to write and journal a lot more, and really connect with like my inner child, and not kind of this like packaged professional artist that I'd been taught to present to the world. And, in musical theater, they talk about your type, and you're thinking about casting, and you're marketing yourself as a professional, and really just kind of letting that all go to really come back to why I was doing it and what I loved. So really started to figure out the music that I liked, or the different practices that I liked. And at the time was also really discovering my own form of spirituality as well, and was really finding this connection with creativity and spirituality. Because in my experience, and I also, in my background, I lived in an ashram as a teenager. So I was introduced to yoga and meditation at a very young age, and started practicing yoga as a teenager. But they were kind of separate lives. It was like there's a spiritual side, and then there's this creative side where there's theater, and there's all these things that I want to do for my career. But I started to realize that like the principles, when you come down to like the bare principles of what creativity is, and where does it come from, and what does being in flow mean, and what does being inspired mean, like where does inspiration come from, all of these kind of questions that made me feel really good when I did it. When I was engaged in a creative practice, when I was on stage, I felt like I was connected to something larger than myself. I felt like I was, in flow and really in the moment. And it was this really mindful practice, while also learning these mindful practices and techniques in meditation and yoga and things like that. So when I was going through this journey of really rediscovering who I was as a creative soul, I was starting to marry the two and really see the intersection between how creativity and spirituality are essentially teaching the same thing. They're just different ways to look at it, different practices to find that same thing. And what I was really seeking was that being in the moment, and really listening and responding to what was being in the moment, and like having that gratitude and that zest for life by loving what you're doing, and being engaged with your whole body with what you're doing. Because I think that's what I was being taught in acting school, but really marrying that with the spiritual practice. And so I started to go on my own journey with this, really, figuring these things out for myself. I ended up staying at this job at the theater, working in the business office, where I really felt like my creative soul was being sucked dry. Like I was not using my gifts. I was not sharing my talents. And so I started to just find creative projects that I could assign to myself to really like fill back up my cup. So I ended up self-publishing a poetry book. I was really getting back into poetry, which is something that I loved as a child. Ended up writing a poetry book and just self-publishing it on Amazon. It's called Mermaid Musings, Stories of Sea, Sex, and Spirituality, which was just such a fun thing because it was just for me. It wasn't for anyone else. It was really for me to just explore that really creative side where no one was really telling me what to do. And then that also led me to writing and performing a one-woman show. I was kind of, upset with this idea in the theater world that, someone has to cast you and someone has to give you a role. And I really felt like my agency was taken away in this professional theater world that I was getting into. And so I thought, no one can tell me how to express my creativity. Like my creativity, my expression is my own. And I want to explore some of my own stories. I want to process some of my own stories instead of, playing a character. And so I wrote a one-woman show based off my own life. It's called My Sexual Spiritual Awakening. So you can see some of the similar themes there. And I ended up performing that in New York City at Dixon Place, which is a really great place for young artists and emerging artists. And doing these two projects really showed me that I don't have to wait for someone else to tell me yes. Like I can be my own yes. I can be my own artist. Like it doesn't matter. Like I don't like that idea of standing in line and waiting. And so this really gave me this this empowerment to really just follow what I was curious about. And I think that's something I was taught as a child, to really follow my curiosities and see where that was led. But I had kind of gotten stuck in the mindset of, well, if you want to be a professional artist, you have to do this, this, and this. So I really was coming back to that in myself, and then discovered creativity coaching. I started, looking at some of the people like Eric Maisel, and I did B School with Marie Forleo, whom you mentioned, and was really just trying to figure out like a way that I could use this as a way to support my artistic practices and share this practice with others. And over the years, it's really evolved in many different iterations. I was doing one-on-one coaching, which I still do frequently. But now what I'm really passionate about is creativity in community and connection. And so I teach these creative workshops, which is really centered around listening to your inner voice without any external distractions, and really getting to know and spend intentional time with your inner creative soul and with your creative artist. Because I think there are so many different messages and external things that tell us, how things should look or what you should be doing. But really our creativity is such an authentic expression of ourselves. And it can look like so many different things. It doesn't matter what the actual practice is, whether or not you love to paint, whether or not you love to write, whether or not you love to sing, like all of these different practices. And I'm also a multi-passionate creative, so I love all of these things as well, and I think my creativity was also very, in this like capitalist mindset that we live in. It's like, you want to monetize your creativity. You want to do something productive. So I was kind of coming at creativity in a like, well, I want to produce something, to make something, to then sell it or whatever that is. But I really had to come back to this like sense of play and this sense of permission to really just follow those curiosities. And so, now in leading these creativity workshops, I find it so helpful for people to really just have a space, a held space, to be able to find that within themselves. Because I think even in my own journey, I was coming up against all these limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, my inner critic, not thinking that I was good enough or talented enough. And then also realistically, like the time and the accountability that it actually takes to be accountable to yourself, and to, if you say that you're going to do a creative practice, like holding yourself to that and really dropping in and having that held space to write and to listen and to, give prompts. So nowadays I do these creative workshops where, it's kind of like a 6-week journey where you go through it and you're kind of discovering your own creative process, and you're discovering what your personal creative process looks like. And within that is, of course, creative cycles and, these dips and valleys of who we are as cyclical people, and really just getting to develop and build a relationship with your creativity in a way that you may never have looked at before or never have been taught to before. And this goes to not only artists who were pursuing it professionally like I was, but also to people who, think that they're not creative. I think there's this belief that unless you're a working artist, then you're not an artist, you're not creative. But, being creative is such an inherent thing in a human kind. Like human beings are inherently creative. Just by living and breathing, we are creating each moment. And so it really became this larger thing of connecting our creativity to the divine and connecting our creativity to ourselves and our communities, and how much that can change when you're really in deep relationship with yourself and really in deep relationship with what makes you feel happy and inspired and what excites you, and following what lights you up, because it creates such ripple effects in the world and in your life. And yeah, it's just, it goes so deep, but it's such beautiful, fulfilling, exciting, inspired work. That's a constant journey. And it's a constant unpeeling back all of the layers. And so I'm still continuously on this journey as I continue to share and share from what's on my heart and what it lights me up, and really following that. So it's evolved into these workshops, into the podcast. I host the Creative Soul podcast, and all of these things. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today.
Oh my God. I love it. I love your story. I think my so many favorite parts, but just the fact that you had this moment of like, I'm not going to wait for permission anymore. I'm not going to stand in line. Like, I'm going to tap into my creativity to explore my craft in the way that I want to and share my story. And I think it's such an important message, particularly for artists, because I know there is so much frustration around, you know, like the gatekeepers of like people in the industry, and there is another way. And it's so empowering to hear stories like this, and to also just like, you get to give yourself permission, right? Like, to stop waiting for other people. So I love that part of your story. And I think another piece which is really valuable in relation to artists and creatives, that is part of the value and like the skill set that a lot of artists bring, is that capacity to listen and the capacity to be present. And when we look at our world, like the majority of our problems stem from a lack of listening, a lack of empathy, a lack of consciousness, and a lack of presence. And this kind of feeds on from the conversation that we were just having on, Leya just interviewed me on her podcast, which you should definitely go and check out. It was a really great conversation, because this is reminding me of another kind of colleague and client of mine, Lily Stiefel. And she had, part of her work is bringing artists together with companies to bring those skill sets into places where people feel kind of alienated or disconnected from their creativity. And you know, the more conversations are rising around like toxic workplace culture and, you know, just like lack of humanness in so many of the spaces that are just running our countries. And so, you know, that is one of the ways that I think it's so important for artists to recognize that that's a value that is so inherent and probably sometimes really taken for granted, like that capacity to know how to be in your body, to know how to be present, and to, you know, to cultivate magic from that place. And that's something that all humans need more of. And because it really is just that lack of empathy of just being in our heads, being in constant distraction, not listening to our bodies. And so missing the signs and the cues about our health, you know, it being easier to just kind of like disregard other people's desires and well-beings for, you know, for personal gain, and just so many of these systematic problems that I really do believe creativity is the solution for. And so the fact that you're bringing this, you know, you've identified that as such a skill of yours, and now bringing that to others through workshops to be able to cultivate that as a skill is really, I do think it's the future. Like, I do think it's the answer. And it's also, it can be very uncomfortable work too, right? Because I know for me personally, as somebody who's been through like a big burnout and a big kind of like emotional healing crisis, particularly as a Brit, because we're very uncomfortable being, you know, talking open emotionally. I find Americans are generally more adept at being open emotionally than British people generally are. And I've been very much in my head because, you know, that's just like a comfortable place to be when there are uncomfortable emotions in our body that we don't have the tools or the resources or the space or the support to be able to process. So I'm curious, like how that has shown up for you in your own practice and with clients that you're working with, kind of like moving through the discomfort of like getting out of our heads and into this kind of like unknown world of being present in our bodies and with sensation and with emotion.
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I think that is the block, that like we're not embodied, you know. We live in our heads, and in our heads is our inner critic, and in our heads is our imposter syndrome. In our head is, you know, that judgment. And I find this a lot, and the way that I work with clients primarily now is through the art of writing. And it's funny because if you had asked me, you know, a couple of years ago, if I considered myself a writer, I would say, no, I'm an actor, I'm a singer, I'm a dancer. I would never think I'm a writer. But I think writing connects us so intimately with our inner voice, with our inner thoughts. It's literally putting our thoughts and our beliefs and our visions on a page for other people to maybe see or not see, which is so vulnerable. And it can be really hard, you know, when people are faced with that blank page, to even face that part of themselves, even when no one's watching. I lead workshops sometimes, and people can get so paralyzed by that idea of the blank page because it's all of your doubts facing you, and how are you going to get that out? And so the process that I've developed is really like an embodied writing practice, to really get people. The purpose is to get people out of their heads and into the body. And so the way that I do that is through prompts, and through, you hear from Julia Cameron, if you've ever done the Artist's Way, she does the morning pages, which are really stream of consciousness. The idea is to write 3 pages without lifting your pen off the paper, so that you're not giving yourself that time to think. You're not giving yourself that time to, what am I writing about? Is this good enough? What am I even saying? Like, no, you get the thoughts out there, which can look like, sometimes I do my morning pages and it's like, I'm hungry, I need to pee, my stomach hurts, like, or like random disconnected thoughts that don't make any sense. But the idea is to get them out of your head and onto the page. So I developed this process where in my workshops, we always start with a guided meditation to really drop into your body. So it's a chance to really tune into your body, see what's going on, see, where you feel tight, where you feel open, what are the cues that your body is giving you. Take a moment to just tune in and listen, and then start with a 5-minute brain dump. So we always just, and that's really just to like skim the stuff off the top off. So you just get it out on the page. And then through a series of asking really specific questions, really specific prompts where you don't have time to overthink, you don't have time to, really explore it. You're really just like allowing your body to take over and letting it flow out. And I find writing can be, and you can do this with other practices too, but writing, because it connects you to that like really intimate depth of truth, it's hard, but it's so rewarding when you kind of like get out of your own way and get your mind out of it. And like, you don't write from the mind, you write from the body. And so even there's this specific prompt where you tune into a part of your body, let's say your heart or your knee or your ankle. And like, what would your ankle say? What does your ankle have to tell you? And like really going deep and tuning into things that you wouldn't ever think of, because we have to get our thinking mind out of it, or else, true creativity, true flow can't really happen. Because if your mind is getting in your own way, then you're not actually present. You're not actually embodied. And so I found that that's the best way to really like open people up and learn how to remove their ego, to really drop into spirit and really drop into flow.
Yeah, I agree. It was the same for me. It was discovering Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way and doing the morning pages that was just such a pivotal time for me. And so now whenever I hear that somebody's like just picked up that book, I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. Like, what's going to happen next? Like, this is
yes, totally.
And I actually watched an interview from her, which was really mind blowing to me, but makes so much sense, that just this process of writing down your thoughts is, it's you calling all of your energy back, and it's you like letting go of any kind of toxicity, any blocks between you and yourself, or any other people's stuff that you've taken on that isn't yours, and really like flushing that out so that you can get in tune back again with, really your soul desires and how you feel and what's calling you and what's meaningful to you, and just creating that objectivity around it is so, so important in creating that clarity that allows you to turn it into action. And I love quoting there was a Harvard study that they did on graduates, and the difference was the people who, I think it was like the 10% of that class who had written down their goals had created like 90% more wealth, or whatever their measure of success was, than the people who hadn't. And it's so powerful to just, like get it out of our head. And even the way that you were talking about it just then made me realize that writing is a body practice. I think I've always thought of it as a head practice, and I think it can be. I think definitely when you're handwriting, it does connect to more of your kind of like unconscious, like your soul voice, versus like just getting what's in your head out on paper.
Yeah, exactly. It connects you to like, we started talking about, connecting to your inner voice and like, what does your creative soul want to say? It connects you to that, like the deepest, most, vulnerable part of yourself, which is hard to be so truthful with yourself and to really excavate and explore. But I find like there's so many there's so many like gems to pull out. Like, even if I do a writing practice where I'm going to respond to a word for 3 minutes and, 90% of what I write is crap and I'm not trying to be good. I'm not trying to be whatever, but there's that one sentence in there that blows my mind. And I'm like, who wrote that? Like, I wrote that. But you find it's developing this relationship with your inner wisdom and like, and it's really a practice in like learning how to trust yourself and to really like get that stuff out of the way, like we were saying. And so, yeah, it's just everything. It's changed everything for me as an artist, as a creative, and really just learning to build deep relationship with myself.
Yeah, totally. And I resonate with so much of your story. We have a lot of parallels, and
Yeah.
one of those pieces was the same for me when I started working as a writer. And before that day, I'd never considered myself a writer, even though that was something that I did, very regularly and very consistently. But I also think that anybody who can write can be a writer, like anybody who can put words on the page, who's willing to make that connection with themselves. There's so much stigma and like hierarchy around labels and, particularly in creativity. And I think it's just such a powerful tool that like, if you know how to write words and get your thoughts out on the paper, it's a tool that you can use for your own self-development, for your own self-reflection, and for, sharing your voice and getting your message out there. And so for anybody who, and I had a lot of hangups about it because I was like, who am I to call myself a writer? Because it's kind of this like hallowed title that's like only special people who have like a best-selling book can really consider themselves a writer or whatever. So if anybody who's listening has imposter syndrome about being a writer, just, claim it and enjoy that tool and that gift and that talent.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think I had the same thing where I had just never even thought of myself as a writer because I did theater, I wasn't a playwright. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to act and be on stage and sing. But it's so, yeah, it connects you to like your unique voice and your unique message that you have to share and really learning to trust that. And also, in like sharing your, like you said, sharing your message and sharing what you have to offer, because you do have to offer something and it doesn't have to look like, I think even with writing styles, like, because I'm not in that world. So I'm like, I don't care about your grammar. I don't care about your punctuation. Like, I don't care about any of that. Like, I care about you and like what you want to express and how then you are going to communicate that with others. Because, if we can't, the purpose then while we're developing this relationship to ourselves is to be able to share with others so that they either, might see themselves in you and in some of the stuff that you share, or they're able to kind of get this like look into your inner world and, kind of be introduced to new perspectives and new ways of looking at things. So I think it's so beautiful for so many different reasons, but definitely that being one of them, of really being able to communicate and share your message in the only way that you can do it, because no one else can do it like you.
Yeah. And it's so important, right? It's so important for there to be more representation of more diverse voices, particularly women. If you feel like you have a unique story that you haven't seen being told, it's so important for you to share it, because you know that there are so many other people out there who really will resonate and benefit from and really need to hear that. And fuck the grammar police, I say.
Oh, definitely. Like that, not real.
Leya, thank you so much for coming and having this amazing chat with us today. Where can people find out more about your work and everything that you're up to?
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. So my website is just my name, leyavandoren.com. That's LEYAVANDOREN.com. And you can find some information about my workshops. If you sign up for my newsletter, where I share a weekly newsletter where I share writings from my own creative process. I also share a lot of writing prompts, a lot of kind of magical things to pay attention to. If you sign up for my newsletter, there's a free guided writing meditation. And so that kind of will introduce you to the work that I do and really learning how to tap into this inner voice and really write from the body and not the mind. And you don't have to be a writer to access this practice. So there's that. And then also I have a podcast, the Creative Soul Podcast. If you just search that on Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms, and check out Sarah's episode, which was really great. And then also on Instagram at Leya Van Doren, same thing. And you'll find all the links there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. This has been so fun.
Thank you, everybody. And please go leave us a 5-star review on iTunes to support the show. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
For more inspirational content, head over to my website withsarahmac.com and please support the show by liking, commenting, and subscribing.